Tuvalu. Coordinates, 8 degrees 3115 S 179 degrees 1155 E, 8.52083 degrees south 179.19861 degrees east, minus 8.52083, 179.19861. Tuvalu, /ťuväluː/ťuväluː, formerly known as the Ellis Islands, is a Polynesian island country located in the Pacific Ocean, situated in Oceania, about midway between Hawaii and Australia. It lies east-northeast of the Santa Cruz Islands, which belong to the Solomon Islands, southeast of Nauru, south of Kiribati, west of Tokelau, northwest of Samoa and Wallis and Futuna, and north of Fiji. It is composed of 3 reef islands and 6 true atolls spread out between the latitude of 5 degrees to 10 degrees south and longitude of 176 degrees to 180 degrees, west of the international date line. Tuvalu has a population of 10,640, 2012 census. The total land area of the islands of Tuvalu is 26 square kilometers, 10 square miles. The first inhabitants of Tuvalu were Polynesians. The origins of the people of Tuvalu are addressed in the theories regarding migration into the Pacific that began about 3,000 years ago. During pre-European contact times there was frequent canoe voyaging between the islands as Polynesian navigation skills are recognized to have allowed deliberate journeys on double-hull sailing canoes or outrigger canoes. The pattern of settlement that is believed to have occurred is that the Polynesians spread out from Samoa and Tonga into the Tuvaluan atolls, with Tuvalu providing a stepping stone to further migration into the Polynesian outliers in Melanesia and Micronesia. In 1568, Spanish navigator Álvaro de Mendana was the first European to sail through the archipelago, sighting the island of Nui during his expedition in search of Terra Australis. The island of Funafuti was named Ellice Island in 1819. The name Ellis was applied to all of the 9 islands after the work of English hydrographer Alexander George Findlay. The Ellis Islands came into Great Britain's sphere of influence in the late 19th century, as the result of a treaty between Great Britain and Germany relating to the demarcation of the spheres of influence in the Pacific Ocean. Each of the Ellis Islands was declared a British protectorate by Captain Gibson of HMS Curacoa between 9 and October 16, 1892. The Ellis Islands were administered as a British protectorate by a resident commissioner from 1892 to 1916, as part of the British Western Pacific Territories, BWPT, and then as part of the Gilbert and Ellice Islands colony from 1916 to 1976. A referendum was held in December 1974 to determine whether the Gilbert Islands and Ellice Islands should each have their own administration. As a consequence of the referendum, the Gilbert and Ellice Islands colony ceased to exist on January 1, 1976, and the separate British colonies of Kiribati and Tuvalu came into existence. Tuvalu became fully independent within the Commonwealth on October 1, 1978. On September 5, 2000, Tuvalu became the 189th member of the United Nations. History. Prehistory. The origins of the people of Tuvalu are addressed in the theories regarding migration into the Pacific that began about 3,000 years ago. During pre-European contact times there was frequent canoe voyaging between the nearer islands including Samoa and Tonga. 8 of the 9 islands of Tuvalu were inhabited, thus the name, Tuvalu, means 8 standing together in Tuvaluan, compared to Walo meaning 8 in Proto-Austronesian. Possible evidence of fire in the caves of Nanamongo may indicate human occupation for thousands of years. An important creation myth of the islands of Tuvalu is the story of the Te Pusi mo Te Ali, the eel and the flounder, who created the islands of Tuvalu. Te Ali, the flounder, is believed to be the origin of the flat atolls of Tuvalu, and the Te Pusin, the eel, is the model for the coconut palms that are important in the lives of Tuvaluans. The stories as to the ancestors of the Tuvaluans vary from island to island. On Niutel, Funafuti, and Vaitupu, the founding ancestor is described as being from Samoa, whereas on Nanumea, the founding ancestor is described as being from Tonga. Early contacts with other cultures. Tuvalu was first sighted by Europeans on January 16, 1568, during the voyage of Álvaro de Mendana from Spain, who sailed past Nui and charted it as Isla de Jesus, Spanish for Island of Jesus, because the previous day was the Feast of the Holy Name. Mendana made contact with the islanders but was unable to land. During Mendana's second voyage across the Pacific he passed Niulakita on August 29, 1595, which he named La Solitaria. Captain John Byron passed through the islands of Tuvalu in 1764, during his circumnavigation of the globe as captain of the Dolphin, 1751. He charted the atolls as lagoon islands. Keith S. Chambers and Doug Monroe, 1980, identified ʻtuːvəluː as the island that Francisco Morel de Lara sailed past on May 5, 1781, thus solving what Europeans had called the mystery of Gran Cocal. Morel's map and journal named the island El Gran Cocal, the Great Coconut Plantation. However, the latitude and longitude was uncertain. Longitude could only be reckoned crudely at the time, as accurate chronometers only became available in the late 18th century. The next European to visit was Arndt Schuyler de Peyster, of New York, captain of the armed brigantine or privateer Rebecca, sailing under British colors, which passed through the southern Tuvaluan waters in May 1819. De Peyster sighted ʻtuːvəluː in Funafuti, which he named Ellis Island after an English politician, Edward Ellis, the Member of Parliament for Coventry and the owner of the Rebecca's cargo. The name Ellis was applied to all 9 islands after the work of English hydrographer Alexander George Findlay. In 1820, the Russian explorer Mikhail Lazarev visited ʻtuːvəluː as commander of the Marine. Louis Isidore Duperrey, captain of La Coquille, sailed past Nanumanga in May 1824 during a circumnavigation of the Earth, 1822 to 1825. A Dutch expedition, the frigate Maria Reigersberg, found Niue on the morning of June 14, 1825, and named the main island, Vanuatu, as Nederlandsk Island. Whalers began roving the Pacific, although they visited Tuvalu only infrequently because of the difficulties of landing on the atolls. Captain George Barrett of the Nantucket whaler Independence II has been identified as the first whaler to hunt the waters around Tuvalu. He bartered coconuts from the people of New Caledonia in November 1821, and also visited ʻtuːvəluː. A shore camp was established on Sakalua Islet of ʻtuːvəluː, where coal was used to melt down the whale blubber. For less than a year between 1862 and 1863, Peruvian ships engaged in the so-called blackbirding trade combed the smaller islands of Polynesia from Easter Island in the eastern Pacific to Tuvalu in the southern atolls of the Gilbert Islands, now Kiribati, seeking recruits to fill the extreme labor shortage in Peru. While some islanders were voluntary recruits, the blackbirders were notorious for enticing islanders onto ships with tricks, such as pretending to be Christian missionaries, as well as kidnapping islanders at gunpoint. The Reverend A.W. Murray, the earliest European missionary in Tuvalu, reported that in 1863 about 170 people were taken from Funafuti and about 250 were taken from New Caledonia, as there were fewer than 100 of the 300 recorded in 1861 as living on New Caledonia. Christianity came to Tuvalu in 1861 when Elikana, a deacon of a Congregational church in Manihiki, Cook Islands, became caught in a storm and drifted for 8 weeks before landing at New Caledonia on May 10, 1861. Elikana began preaching Christianity. He was trained at Malua Theological College, a London Missionary Society (LMS) school in Samoa, before beginning his work in establishing the Church of Tuvalu. In 1865, the Reverend A.W. Murray of the LMS, a Protestant Congregationalist missionary society, arrived as the first European missionary, where he too evangelized among the inhabitants of Tuvalu. Protestantism was well established by 1878, with preachers on each island. In the later 19th and early 20th centuries, the ministers of what became the Church of Tuvalu, Te Ekalesia Kelesiano Tuvalu, were predominantly Samoans, who influenced the development of the Tuvaluan language and the music of Tuvalu. The islands came into Britain's sphere of influence in the late 19th century, when each of the Ellis Islands was declared a British protectorate by Captain Gibson of HMS Kirakoa, between 9 and October 16, 1892. Trading firms and traders. Trading companies became active in Tuvalu in the mid-19th century. The trading companies engaged Pelagi traders who lived on the islands. John, also known as Jack, O'Brien was the first European to settle in Tuvalu. He became a trader on Funafuti in the 1850s. He married Salai, the daughter of the paramount chief of Funafuti. Louis Beck, who later found success as a writer, was a trader on Nanumanga from April 1880 until the trading station was destroyed later that year in a cyclone. He then became a trader on ʻtuːvəluː. In 1892, Captain Davis of HMS Royalist reported on trading activities and traders on each of the islands visited. Captain Davis identified the following traders in the Ellis Group: Edmund Duffy, Nanumea, Jack Buckland, ʻtuːvəluː, Harry Nitz, Vetupu, Jack O'Brien, Funafuti, Alfred Risto and Emile Finisat, ʻtuːvəluː, and Martin Kleiss, Nui. During this time, the greatest number of Pelagi traders lived on the atolls, acting as agents for the trading companies. Some islands would have competing traders, while drier islands might only have a single trader. In the later 1890s and into first decade of the 20th century, structural changes occurred in the operation of the Pacific trading companies. They moved from a practice of having traders resident on each island to instead becoming a business operation where the supercargo, the cargo manager of a trading ship, would deal directly with the islanders when a ship visited an island. From 1900, the numbers of Pelagi traders in Tuvalu declined. The last of them were Fred Whibley on ʻtuːvəluː, Alfred Risto on ʻtuːvəluː, and Martin Kleiss on Nui. By 1909 there were no more resident Pelagi traders representing the trading companies, although Whibley, Risto and Kleiss remained in the islands until their deaths. Scientific expeditions and travelers. The United States exploring expedition under Charles Wilkes visited Funafuti, ʻtuːvəluː and Vaitupu in 1841. During this expedition, engraver and illustrator Alfred Thomas Agate recorded the dress and tattoo patterns of the men of ʻtuːvəluː. In 1885 or 1886, the New Zealand photographer Thomas Andrew visited Funafuti and Nui. In 1890, Robert Louis Stevenson, his wife Fanny Vandegrift Stevenson and her son Lloyd Osborne sailed on the Janet Nicholl, a trading steamer owned by Henderson and McFarland of Auckland, New Zealand, which operated between Sydney and Auckland and into the Central Pacific. The Janet Nicholl visited 3 of the Ellis Islands, while Fanny records that they made landfall at Funafuti, ʻtuːvəluː, and Nanumea. Jane Rester suggests that it was more likely they landed at ʻtuːvəluː rather than Funafuti. An account of this voyage was written by Fanny Stevenson and published under the title The Cruise of the Janet Nicholl, together with photographs taken by Robert Louis Stevenson and Lloyd Osborne. In 1894, Count Rudolf Feshtetitolna, his wife Isla, née Hagen, and her daughter Blanche Hagen visited Funafuti aboard the yacht Latolna. The Count spent several days photographing men and women on Funafuti. The boreholes on Funafuti, at the site now called Darwin's Drill, are the result of drilling conducted by the Royal Society of London for the purpose of investigating the formation of coral reefs to determine whether traces of shallow water organisms could be found at depth in the coral of Pacific atolls. This investigation followed the work on the structure and distribution of coral reefs conducted by Charles Darwin in the Pacific. Drilling occurred in 1896, 1897 and 1898. Professor Edgeworth David of the University of Sydney was a member of the 1896 Funafuti Coral Reef Boring Expedition of the Royal Society, under Professor William Salas, and led the expedition in 1897. Photographers on these trips recorded people, communities, and scenes at Funafuti. Charles Headley, a naturalist at the Australian Museum, accompanied the 1896 expedition, and during his stay on Funafuti he collected invertebrate and ethnological objects. The descriptions of these were published in Memoir 3 of the Australian Museum Sydney between 1896 and 1900. Headley also wrote the general account of the atoll of Funafuti, the ethnology of Funafuti, and the mollusca of Funafuti. Edgar Waite was also part of the 1896 expedition and published the mammals, reptiles, and fishes of Funafuti. William Rainbow describes the spiders and insects collected at Funafuti and the insect fauna of Funafuti. Harry Clifford Fassett, captain's clerk and photographer, recorded people, communities and scenes at Funafuti in 1900 during a visit of USFC Albatross when the United States Fish Commission was investigating the formation of coral reefs on Pacific atolls. Colonial Administration. The Ellis Islands were administered as a British protectorate from 1892 to 1916, as part of the British Western Pacific Territories, BWPT, by a resident commissioner based in the Gilbert Islands. The administration of the BWTP ended in 1916, and the Gilbert and Ellis Islands colony was established, which existed until 1976. Second World War. During the Pacific War, Funafuti was used as a base to prepare for the subsequent seaborne attacks on the Gilbert Islands, Kiribati, that were occupied by Japanese forces. The United States Marine Corps landed on Funafuti on October 2, 1942 and on Nanumea and ʻtuːvəluː in August 1943. The Japanese had already occupied Tarawa and other islands in what is now Kiribati, but were delayed by the losses at the Battle of the Coral Sea. The islanders assisted the American forces to build airfields on Funafuti, Nanumea and ʻtuːvəluː and to unload supplies from ships. On Funafuti, The islanders shifted to the smaller islets so as to allow the American forces to build the airfield and to build naval bases and port facilities on Phong Afael. A naval construction battalion, Seabees, built a seaplane ramp on the lagoon side of Phong Afael Islet, for seaplane operations by both short and long-range seaplanes, and a compacted coral runway was also constructed on Phong Afael, with runways also constructed to create Nanumea Airfield and New Kufetau Airfield. USN patrol torpedo boats, PTs, were based at Funafuti from November 2, 1942 to May 11, 1944. The atolls of Tuvalu acted as staging posts during the preparation for the Battle of Tarawa and the Battle of Makin that commenced on November 20, 1943, which were part of the implementation of Operation Galvanic. After the war, the military airfield on Funafuti was developed into Funafuti International Airport. Post-World War II, transition to independence. The formation of the United Nations after World War II resulted in the United Nations Special Committee on Decolonization committing to a process of decolonization. As a consequence, the British colonies in the Pacific started on a path to self-determination. In 1974, the ministerial government was introduced to the Gilbert and Ellis Islands colony through a change to the constitution. In that year a general election was held, and a referendum was held in December 1974 to determine whether the Gilbert Islands and Ellis Islands should each have their own administration. As a consequence of the referendum, separation occurred in two stages. The Tuvalu in Order 1975, which took effect on October 1, 1975, recognized Tuvalu as a separate British dependency with its own government. The second stage occurred on January 1, 1976, when separate administrations were created out of the civil service of the Gilbert and Ellis Islands colony. Elections to the House of Assembly of the British colony of Tuvalu were held on August 27, 1977, with ʻtuːvə-loo being appointed Chief Minister in the House of Assembly of the colony of Tuvalu on October 1, 1977. The House of Assembly was dissolved in July 1978, with the government of ʻtuːvə-loo continuing as a caretaker government until the 1981 elections were held. ʻtuːvə-loo became the first Prime Minister on October 1, 1978, when Tuvalu became an independent nation. Tuvalu became fully independent within the Commonwealth on October 1, 1978. On September 5, 2000, Tuvalu became the 189th member of the United Nations. Government. Parliamentary democracy. The Constitution of Tuvalu states that it is the supreme law of Tuvalu and that all other laws shall be interpreted and applied subject to this Constitution. It sets out the principles of the Bill of Rights and the protection of the fundamental rights and freedoms. Tuvalu is a parliamentary democracy and Commonwealth realm with Elizabeth II as Queen of Tuvalu. Since the Queen resides in the United Kingdom, she is represented in Tuvalu by a Governor-General, whom she appoints upon the advice of the Prime Minister of Tuvalu. In 1986 and 2008, referenda confirmed the monarchy. From 1974, the creation of the British colony of Tuvalu, until independence, the legislative body of Tuvalu was called the House of the Assembly or Faliaifono. Following independence in October 1978, the House of the Assembly was renamed the Parliament of Tuvalu or Palomino Tuvalu. The Unicameral Parliament has 15 members, with elections held every 4 years. The members of Parliament select the Prime Minister, who is the head of government, and the Speaker of Parliament. The ministers that form the cabinet are appointed by the Governor-General on the advice of the Prime Minister. There are no formal political parties. Election campaigns are largely based on personal/family ties and reputations. The Tuvalu National Library and Archives holds vital documentation on the cultural, social and political heritage of Tuvalu, including surviving records from the Colonial Administration, as well as Tuvalu government archives. Tuvalu is a state party to the following human rights treaties: the Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, CRPD. Tuvalu has commitments to ensuring human rights are respected under the Universal Periodic Review, UPR, the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and the Tekakiga 3, National Strategy for Sustainable Development 2016 to 2020, TK3, which sets out the development agenda of the government of Tuvalu. TK3 includes new strategic areas, in addition to the 8 identified in TK2, which are climate change, environment, migration and urbanization, and oceans and seas. Legal system. There are 8 island courts and lands courts. Appeals in relation to land disputes are made to the Lands Courts Appeal Panel. Appeals from the island courts and the Lands Courts Appeal Panel are made to the Magistrates Court, which has jurisdiction to hear civil cases involving up to 10,000 Taiwan dollars. The Superior Court is the High Court of Tuvalu, as it has unlimited original jurisdiction to determine the law of Tuvalu and to hear appeals from the lower courts. Rulings of the High Court can be appealed to the Court of Appeal of Tuvalu. From the Court of Appeal, there is a right of appeal to Her Majesty in Council, i.e., the Privy Council in London. With regard to the judiciary, the first female island court magistrate was appointed to the island court in Nanumea in the 1980s and another in New Kalili in the early 1990s. There were 7 female magistrates in the island courts of Tuvalu, as of 2007, in comparison to the past where only 1 woman magistrate served in the Magistrate Court of Tuvalu. The law of Tuvalu comprises the acts voted into law by the Parliament of Tuvalu and statutory instruments that become law, certain acts passed by the Parliament of the United Kingdom, during the time Tuvalu was either a British protectorate or British colony, the common law, and customary law, particularly in relation to the ownership of land. The land tenure system is largely based on catecy, extended family ownership. Foreign relations. Tuvalu participates in the work of the Pacific Community, SPC, and is a member of the Pacific Islands Forum, the Commonwealth of Nations and the United Nations. It has maintained a mission at the United Nations in New York City since 2000. It is a member of the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. Tuvalu maintains close relations with Fiji, New Zealand, Australia, which has maintained a High Commission in Tuvalu since 2018, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, the United States of America, the United Kingdom and the European Union. It has diplomatic relations with Taiwan. The country maintains one of the 2 foreign embassies in Tuvalu and has a large assistance program in the islands. A major international priority for Tuvalu in the UN, at the 2002 Earth Summit in Johannesburg, South Africa and in other international fora, is promoting concern about global warming and the possible sea level rising. Tuvalu advocates ratification and implementation of the Kyoto Protocol. In December 2009, the island stalled talks on climate change at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Copenhagen, fearing some other developing countries were not committing fully to binding deals on a reduction in carbon emissions. Their chief negotiator stated, "Tuvalu is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change and our future rests on the outcome of this meeting." Tuvalu participates in the Alliance of Small Island States, OSIS, which is a coalition of small island and low-lying coastal countries that have concerns about their vulnerability to the adverse effects of global climate change. Under the Majuro Declaration, which was signed on September 5, 2013, Tuvalu has made a commitment to implement power generation of 100% renewable energy between 2013 and 2020, which is proposed to be implemented using solar PV, 95% of demand, and biodiesel, 5% of demand. The feasibility of wind power generation will be considered. Tuvalu participates in the operations of the Pacific Islands Applied Geoscience Commission, SOPAC, and the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program, SPREP. Tuvalu is party to a treaty of friendship with the United States, signed soon after independence and ratified by the U.S. Senate in 1983, under which the United States renounced prior territorial claims to Fort Tuvalu in islands, Funafuti, Nukufetau, Nukalili and Niulakita, under the Guano Islands Act of 1856. Tuvalu participates in the operations of the Pacific Island Forum Fisheries Agency, FFA, and the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission, WCPFC. The Tuvaluan government, the U.S. government, and the governments of other Pacific islands are parties to the South Pacific Tuna Treaty, SPTT, which entered into force in 1988. Tuvalu is also a member of the Nauru Agreement, which addresses the management of tuna purse seine fishing in the tropical Western Pacific. The United States and the Pacific Islands countries have negotiated the Multilateral Fisheries Treaty, which encompasses the South Pacific Tuna Treaty, to confirm access to the fisheries in the Western and Central Pacific for U.S. tuna boats. Tuvalu and the other members of the Pacific Island Forum Fisheries Agency, FFA, and the United States have settled a tuna fishing deal for 2015. A longer-term deal will be negotiated. The treaty is an extension of the Nauru Agreement and provides for the U.S.-flagged purse-seine vessels to fish 8,300 days in the region in return for a payment of $90 million made up by tuna fishing industry and U.S. government contributions. In 2015, Tuvalu refused to sell fishing days to certain nations and fleets that have blocked Tuvaluan initiatives to develop and sustain their own fishery. In 2016, the Minister of Natural Resources drew attention to Article 30 of the WCPF Convention, which describes the collective obligation of members to consider the disproportionate burden that management measures might place on small island developing states. In July 2013, Tuvalu signed the Memorandum of Understanding (MOU) to establish the Pacific Regional Trade and Development Facility, which facility originated in 2006, in the context of negotiations for an Economic Partnership Agreement, EPA, between Pacific ACP states and the European Union. The rationale for the creation of the facility being to improve the delivery of aid to Pacific Island countries in support of the Aid for Trade (AFT) requirements. The Pacific ACP states are the countries in the Pacific that are signatories to the Cotonou Agreement with the European Union. On February 18, 2016, Tuvalu signed the Pacific Islands Development Forum Charter and formally joined the Pacific Islands Development Forum (PIDF). In June 2017, Tuvalu signed the Pacific Agreement on Closer Economic Relations (PACER). In March 2017, at the 34th regular session of the UN Human Rights Council, Vanuatu made a joint statement on behalf of Tuvalu and some other Pacific nations raising human rights violations in the Western New Guinea, which has been occupied by Indonesia since 1963, and requested that the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights produce a report. Indonesia rejected Vanuatu's allegations. More than 100,000 Papuans have died during a 50-year Papua conflict. In September 2017, at the 72nd session of the UN General Assembly, the Prime Ministers of Tuvalu, Vanuatu and the Solomon Islands once again raised human rights abuses in Indonesian-occupied West Papua. Defense and law enforcement. Tuvalu has no regular military forces, and spends no money on the military. Its national police force, the Tuvalu Police Force headquartered in Funafuti, includes a maritime surveillance unit, customs, prisons and immigration. Police officers wear British-style uniforms. From 1994 to 2019, the Tuvalu policed its 200-kilometer exclusive economic zone with the Pacific-class patrol boat HMTSS Tamata'ili, provided by Australia. Australia gave Tuvalu and 11 other partners in the Pacific Forum, for use in maritime surveillance and fishery patrol and for search and rescue missions. HMTSS stands for His/Her Majesty's Tuvaluan State Ship or for His/Her Majesty's Tuvalu Surveillance Ship. On April 7, 2019, Australia donated a Guardian-class patrol boat that was named HMTSS Tamata'ili 2, and which will be operated by the Maritime Surveillance Unit of the Tuvalu Police Force. Male homosexuality is illegal in Tuvalu. Crime in Tuvalu is not a significant social problem due to an effective criminal justice system, also due to the influence of the ʻtuːvəluː, the traditional assembly of elders of each island, and the central role of religious institutions in the Tuvaluan community. Administrative divisions. Tuvalu consists of 6 atolls and 3 reef islands. The smallest, Niulakita, is administered as part of Niutau. Each island has its own high chief, or uluwalakai, and several sub-chiefs, alakis. The community council is the ʻtuːvəluː, the traditional assembly of elders, or Taisina o Whenua, literally, gray hairs of the land. In the past, another caste, the priests, Tofuga, were also amongst the decision-makers. The uluwalakai and alakai exercise informal authority at the local level. Uluwalakai are always chosen based on ancestry. Under the ʻtuːvəluː Act, 1997, the powers and functions of the ʻtuːvəluː are now shared with the Pilokopule, elected village presidents, one on each atoll. Local government districts consisting of more than one islet. Local government districts consisting of only one island. Tuvalu has ISO 3166-2 codes defined for 1 town council, Funafuti, and 7 island councils. Niulakita, which now has its own island council, is not listed, as it is administered as part of Niutau. Society. Demographics. The population at the 2002 census was 9,561, and the population at the 2012 census was 10,640. The most recent census in 2017 puts the population at 11,192. The population of Tuvalu is primarily of Polynesian ethnicity, with approximately 5.6% of the population being Micronesian. Life expectancy for women in Tuvalu is 68.41 years and 64.01 years for men, 2015 est. The country's population growth rate is 0.82%, 2015 est. The net migration rate is estimated at -6.81 migrants/1,000 population, 2015 est. The threat of global warming in Tuvalu is not yet a dominant motivation for migration, as Tuvaluans appear to prefer to continue living on the islands for reasons of lifestyle, culture and identity. From 1947 to 1983, a number of Tuvaluans from Batuba migrated to Kia'a, an island in Fiji. The settlers from Tuvalu were granted Fijian citizenship in 2005. In recent years, New Zealand and Australia have been the primary destinations for migration or seasonal work. In 2014, attention was drawn to an appeal to the New Zealand Immigration and Protection Tribunal against the deportation of a Tuvaluan family on the basis that they were climate change refugees, who would suffer hardship resulting from the environmental degradation of Tuvalu. However, the subsequent grant of residence permits to the family was made on grounds unrelated to the refugee claim. The family was successful in their appeal because, under the relevant immigration legislation, there were exceptional circumstances of a humanitarian nature that justified the grant of residence permits, for the family was integrated into New Zealand society with a sizable extended family that had effectively relocated to New Zealand. Indeed, in 2013 a claim of a Kiribati man of being a climate change refugee under the Convention relating to the status of refugees, 1951, was determined by the New Zealand High Court to be untenable, for there was no persecution or serious harm related to any of the 5 stipulated Refugee Convention grounds. Permanent migration to Australia and New Zealand, such as for family reunification, requires compliance with the immigration legislation of those countries. New Zealand has an annual quota of 75 Tuvaluans granted work permits under the Pacific Access category, as announced in 2001. The applicants register for the Pacific Access category, PAC, ballots. The primary criterion is that the principal applicant must have a job offer from a New Zealand employer. Tuvaluans also have access to seasonal employment in the horticulture and viticulture industries in New Zealand under the Recognised Seasonal Employer (RSE) work policy introduced in 2007, allowing for employment of up to 5,000 workers from Tuvalu and other Pacific islands. Tuvaluans can participate in the Australian Pacific Seasonal Worker Program, which allows Pacific Islanders to obtain seasonal employment in the Australian agriculture industry, in particular, cotton and cane operations, fishing industry, in particular aquaculture, and with accommodation providers in the tourism industry. Languages. The Tuvaluan language and English are the national languages of Tuvalu. Tuvaluan is of the Aleutian group of Polynesian languages, distantly related to all other Polynesian languages such as Hawaiian, Maori, Tahitian, Rapa Nui, Samoan, and Tongan. It is most closely related to the languages spoken on the Polynesian outliers in Micronesia and northern and central Melanesia. The Tuvaluan language has borrowed from the Samoan language, as a consequence of Christian missionaries in the late 19th and early 20th centuries being predominantly Samoan. The Tuvaluan language is spoken by virtually everyone, while a language very similar to Gilbertese is spoken on Niue. English is also an official language but is not spoken in daily use. Parliament and official functions are conducted in the Tuvaluan language. There are about 13,000 Tuvaluan speakers worldwide. Radio Tuvalu transmits Tuvaluan language programming. Religion. The Congregational Christian Church of Tuvalu, which is part of the Christian Reformed tradition, is the state church of Tuvalu, although in practice this merely entitles it to the privilege of performing special services on major national events. Its adherents comprise about 97% of the 10,837, 2012 census, inhabitants of the archipelago. The Constitution of Tuvalu guarantees freedom of religion, including the freedom to practice, the freedom to change religion, the right not to receive religious instruction at school or to attend religious ceremonies at school, and the right not to take an oath or make an affirmation that is contrary to his religion or belief. Other Christian groups include the Roman Catholic community served by the Mission Sui Juris of Funafuti, and the Seventh-day Adventist, which has 1.4% of the population. According to its own estimates, The Tuvalu Brethren Church has about 500 members, i.e. 4.5% of the population. Non-Christian religions include the Baha'i with 1.0% of the population, and the Ahmadiyya Muslim community with about 50 members, 0.4% of the population. The introduction of Christianity ended the worship of ancestral spirits and other deities, animism, along with the power of the Vaka-Atua, the priests of the old religions. Lamuakov describes the objects of worship as varying from island to island, although ancestor worship was described by Reverend D.J. Whitney in 1870 as being common practice. Health. Since the late 20th century, the biggest health problem in Tuvalu, and the leading cause of death, has been heart disease, which is closely followed by diabetes and high blood pressure. In 2016, the majority of deaths resulted from cardiac diseases, with diabetes mellitus, hypertension, obesity, and cerebral vascular disease among the other causes of death. Education. Education in Tuvalu is free and compulsory between the ages of 6 and 15 years. Each island has a primary school. ʻtuːvəluː secondary school is located on Tupu. Students board at the school during the school term, returning to their home islands each school vacation. Tuvalu Secondary School, a day school operated by the Church of Tuvalu, is on Funafuti. Tuvalu offers the Cambridge syllabus. ʻtuːvəluː offers the Fiji Junior Certificate, FJC, at Year 10, Tuvaluan Certificate at Year 11 and the Pacific Senior Secondary Certificate, PSSC, at Year 12, which is set by SPI, the Fiji-based exam board. Sixth form students who pass their PSSC go on to the Augmented Foundation program, funded by the Tuvalu government. This program is required for tertiary education programs outside of Tuvalu and is available at the University of the South Pacific, USP, Extension Center in Funafuti. Required attendance at school is 10 years for males and 11 years for females, 2001. The adult literacy rate is 99.0%, 2002. In 2010, there were 1,918 students who were taught by 109 teachers, 98 certified and 11 uncertified. The teacher-pupil ratio for primary schools in Tuvalu is around 118 for all schools with the exception of Nadi School, which has a ratio of 127. Nadi School on Funafuti is the largest primary school in Tuvalu with more than 900 students, 45% of the total primary school enrollment. The pupil-teacher ratio for Tuvalu is low compared to the entire Pacific region, ratio of 129. Community training centers, CTCs, have been established within the primary schools on each atoll. They provide vocational training to students who do not progress beyond Class 8 because they failed the entry qualifications for secondary education. The CTCs offer training in basic carpentry, gardening and farming, sewing and cooking. At the end of their studies, the graduates can apply to continue studies either at ʻtuːvəluː Secondary School or the Tuvalu Maritime Training Institute, TMTI. Adults can also attend courses at the CTCs. The Tuvaluan Employment Ordinance of 1966 sets the minimum age for paid employment at 14 years and prohibits children under the age of 15 from performing hazardous work. Culture. Architecture. The traditional buildings of Tuvalu used plants and trees from the native broadleaf forest, including timber from Puka, Hernandia peltata, Njia or Injia bush, Pemphis acidula, Miro, Thespesia paponia, Tunga, Rhizophyra mucronata, Thauer fofifini, or woman's fiber tree, Hibiscus tiliaceus. Fiber is from coconut, Thera, native fig, Ficus aspem, Phala, screw pine or pandanus. The buildings were constructed without nails and were lashed together with a plaited senet rope that was handmade from dried coconut fiber. Following contact with Europeans, iron products were used including nails and corrugated roofing material. Modern building in Tuvalu are constructed from imported building materials, including imported timber and concrete. Church and community buildings, maniapa, are usually coated with white paint that is known as laze, which is made by burning a large amount of dead coral with firewood. The whitish powder that is the result is mixed with water and painted on the buildings. Art of Tuvalu. The women of Tuvalu use cowrie and other shells in traditional handicrafts. The artistic traditions of Tuvalu have traditionally been expressed in the design of clothing and traditional handicrafts such as the decoration of mats and fans. Crochet, kolos, is one of the art forms practiced by Tuvaluan women. The material culture of Tuvalu uses traditional design elements in artifacts used in everyday life, such as the design of canoes and fish hooks made from traditional materials. The design of women's skirts, titi, tops, tukisaka, headbands, armbands, and wristbands, which continue to be used in performances of the traditional dance songs of Tuvalu, represents contemporary Tuvaluan art and design. In 2015, an exhibition was held on Funafuti of the art of Tuvalu, with works that addressed climate change through the eyes of artists, and the display of Kopatiolaga, Possessions of Life, a display of the various artifacts of Tuvalu culture. Dance and music. The traditional music of Tuvalu consists of a number of dances, including Fakasisi, Fakanau and Fatel. The Fatel, in its modern form, is performed at community events and to celebrate leaders and other prominent individuals, such as the visit of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge in September 2012. The Tuvaluan style can be described as a musical microcosm of Polynesia, where contemporary and older styles coexist. Cuisine. The cuisine of Tuvalu is based on the staple of coconut and the many species of fish found in the ocean and lagoons of the atolls. Desserts made on the islands include coconut and coconut milk, rather than animal milk. The traditional foods eaten in Tuvalu are palaka, taro, bananas, breadfruit and coconut. Tuvaluans also eat seafood, including coconut crab and fish from the lagoon and ocean. Another traditional food source is seabirds, take or black noddy and aki or white tern, with pork being eaten mostly at fete or parties with dancing to celebrate events. Palaka is the main source for carbohydrates. Seafood provides protein. Bananas and breadfruit are supplemental crops. Coconut is used for its juice, to make other beverages and to improve the taste of some dishes. A 1,560 square meter pond was built in 1996 on Vaitupa to sustain aquaculture in Tuvalu. Flying fish are also caught as a source of food, and is an exciting activity, using a boat, a butterfly net and a spotlight to attract the flying fish. Heritage. The traditional community system still survives to a large extent on Tuvalu. Each family has its own task, or salonga, to perform for the community, such as fishing, house building or defense. The skills of a family are passed on from parents to children. Most islands have their own fusi, community-owned shops similar to convenience stores, where canned foods and bags of rice can be purchased. Goods are cheaper, and fusis give better prices for their own produce. Another important building is the Falagaupu or Maniapa, the traditional island meeting hall, where important matters are discussed and which is also used for wedding celebrations and community activities such as a fatel involving music, singing and dancing. Falagaupu is also used as the name of the Council of Elders, the traditional decision-making body on each island. Under the Falagaupu Act, Falagaupu means traditional assembly in each island, composed in accordance with the aganu of each island. Aganu means traditional customs and culture. Traditional single outrigger canoe. Popao, from the Samoan language, meaning a small fishing canoe made from a single log, is the traditional single outrigger canoe of Tuvalu, of which the largest could carry 4 to 6 adults. The variations of single outrigger canoes that had been developed on Vaitupu and Nanumea were reef type or paddled canoes, that is, they were designed for carrying over the reef and being paddled, rather than being sailed. Outrigger canoes from Niue were constructed with an indirect type of outrigger attachment and the hull is double-ended, with no distinct bow and stern. These canoes were designed to be sailed over the Niue Lagoon. The booms of the outrigger are longer than those found in other designs of canoes from the other islands. This made the Niue canoe more stable when used with a sail than the other designs. Sport and leisure. A traditional sport played in Tuvalu is kilakiti, which is similar to cricket. A popular sport specific to Tuvalu is anyo, which is played with 2 round balls of 12 centimeters, 5 in diameter. Anyo is a localized version of volleyball, in which the 2 hard balls made from pandanus leaves are volleyed at great speed with the team members trying to stop the anyo hitting the ground. Traditional sports in the late 19th century were foot racing, lance throwing, quarterstaff fencing and wrestling, although the Christian missionaries disapproved of these activities. The popular sports in Tuvalu include kilakiti, anyo, association football, futsal, volleyball, handball, basketball and rugby union. Tuvalu has sports organizations for athletics, badminton, tennis, table tennis, volleyball, football, basketball, rugby union, weightlifting and powerlifting. At the 2013 Pacific Mini Games, Tuvalu won Tuvalu's first gold medal in an international competition in the weightlifting 62 kg male snatch. He also won bronze in the clean and jerk, and obtained the silver medal overall for the combined event. In 2015, ʻtuːvəluː received the first gold medal won by Tuvalu at the Pacific Games in the powerlifting 120 kg male division. Football in Tuvalu is played at club and national team level. The Tuvalu national football team trains at the Tuvalu Sports Ground in Futuna and competes in the Pacific Games. The Tuvalu National Football Association is an associate member of the Oceania Football Confederation, OFC, and is seeking membership in FIFA. The Tuvalu national futsal team participates in the Oceanian Futsal Championship. A major sporting event is the Independence Day Sports Festival held annually on 1st of October. The most important sports event within the country is arguably the Tuvalu Games, which are held yearly since 2008. Tuvalu first participated in the Pacific Games in 1978 and in the Commonwealth Games in 1998, when a weightlifter attended the games held at Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Two table tennis players attended the 2002 Commonwealth Games in Manchester, England. Tuvalu entered competitors in shooting, table tennis and weightlifting at the 2006 Commonwealth Games in Melbourne, Australia. 3 athletes participated in the 2010 Commonwealth Games in Delhi, India, entering the discus, shot put and weightlifting events, and a team of 3 weightlifters and 2 table tennis players attended the 2014 Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. Tuvaluan athletes have also participated in the men's and women's 100 meters sprint at the World Championships in Athletics from 2009. The Tuvalu Association of Sports and National Olympic Committee, TASNOC, was recognized as a National Olympic Committee in July 2007. Tuvalu entered the Olympic Games for the first time at the 2008 Summer Games in Beijing, China, with a weightlifter and 2 athletes in the men's and women's 100 meters sprint. A team with athletes in the same events represented Tuvalu at the 2012 Summer Olympics. Edimoni Timwani was the sole representative of Tuvalu at the 2016 Summer Olympics in the 100 meters event. Economy and government services. Economy. From 1996 to 2002, Tuvalu was one of the best performing Pacific Island economies and achieved an average real gross domestic product (GDP) growth rate of 5.6% per annum. Economic growth slowed after 2002, with GDP growth of 1.5% in 2008. Tuvalu was exposed to rapid rises in world prices of fuel and food in 2008, with the level of inflation peaking at 13.4%. Tuvalu joined the International Monetary Fund, IMF, on June 24, 2010. The IMF 2010 report on Tuvalu estimates that Tuvalu experienced zero growth in its 2010 GDP, after the economy contracted by about 2% in 2009. On August 5, 2012, the Executive Board of the IMF concluded the Article 4 consultation with Tuvalu, and assessed the economy of Tuvalu. A slow recovery is underway in Tuvalu, but there are important risks. GDP grew in 2011 for the first time since the global financial crisis, led by the private retail sector and education spending. We expect growth to rise slowly. The IMF 2014 country report noted that real GDP growth in Tuvalu had been volatile, averaging only 1% in the past decade. The 2014 country report describes economic growth prospects as generally positive as the result of large revenues from fishing licenses, together with substantial foreign aid. While a budget deficit of $0.4 million Australian dollars was projected for 2015, the Asian Development Bank, ADB, assessed the budget as being $14 Australian dollars. 3 meters in surplus as the result of high tuna fish license fees. The ADB predicted that the 2% growth rate for 2015 would continue into 2016. Nonetheless, Tuvalu has the smallest GDP of any sovereign nation in the world. The government is the primary provider of medical services through Princess Margaret Hospital on Futuna, which operates health clinics on the other islands. Banking services are provided by the National Bank of Tuvalu. Public sector workers make up about 65% of those formally employed. Remittances from Tuvaluans living in Australia and New Zealand, and remittances from Tuvaluan sailors employed on overseas ships are important sources of income for Tuvaluans. Approximately 15% of adult males work as seamen on foreign flag merchant ships. Agriculture in Tuvalu is focused on coconut trees and growing pulaka in large pits of composted soil below the water table. Tuvaluans are otherwise involved in traditional subsistence agriculture and fishing. Tuvaluans are well known for their seafaring skills, with the Tuvalu Maritime Training Institute on Amachakumotu Island, Funafuti, providing training to approximately 120 Marine cadets each year so that they have the skills necessary for employment as seafarers on merchant shipping. The Tuvalu Overseas Seamen's Union, TOSU, is the only registered trade union in Tuvalu. It represents workers on foreign ships. The Asian Development Bank, ADB, estimates that 800 Tuvaluan men are trained, certified and active as seafarers. The ADB estimates that, at any one time, about 15% of the adult male population works abroad as seafarers. Job opportunities also exist as observers on tuna boats where the role is to monitor compliance with the boat's tuna fishing license. Government revenues largely come from sales of fishing licenses, income from the Tuvalu Trust Fund, and from the lease of its TV Internet Top-Level Domain, TLD. In 1998, Tuvalu began deriving revenue from the use of its area code for premium rate telephone numbers and from the commercialization of its TV Internet domain name, which is now managed by VeriSign until 2021. Tuvalu also generates income from postage stamps by the Tuvalu Philatelic Bureau, and from the Tuvalu Ship Registry. The Tuvalu Trust Fund was established in 1987 by the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. The value of the Tuvalu Trust Fund is approximately $100 million. Financial support to Tuvalu is also provided by Japan, South Korea and the European Union. Australia and New Zealand continue to contribute capital to the Tuvalu Trust Fund, and provide other forms of development assistance. The U.S. government is also a major revenue source for Tuvalu. In 1999, the payment from the South Pacific Tuna Treaty, SPTT, was about $9 million, with the value increasing in the following years. In May 2013, representatives from the United States and the Pacific Islands countries agreed to sign interim arrangement documents to extend the Multilateral Fisheries Treaty, which encompasses the South Pacific Tuna Treaty, for 18 months. The United Nations designates Tuvalu as a least developed country, LDC, because of its limited potential for economic development, absence of exploitable resources and its small size and vulnerability to external economic and environmental shocks. Tuvalu participates in the Enhanced Integrated Framework for Trade-Related Technical Assistance to Least Developed Countries, EIF, which was established in October 1997 under the auspices of the World Trade Organization. In 2013, Tuvalu deferred its graduation from Least Developed Country, LDC, status to a developing country to 2015. Prime Minister Ellice Islands said that this deferral was necessary to maintain access by Tuvalu to the funds provided by the United Nations' National Adaptation Programme of Action, NAPA, as once Tuvalu graduates to a developed country, it will not be considered for funding assistance for climate change adaptation programs like NAPA, which only goes to LDCs. Tuvalu had met targets so that Tuvalu was to graduate from LDC status. Prime Minister Ellice Islands wants the United Nations to reconsider its criteria for graduation from LDC status, as not enough weight is given to the environmental plight of small island states like Tuvalu in the application of the Environmental Vulnerability Index, EVI. Tourism. Due to the country's remoteness, tourism is not significant. Visitors totaled 1,684 in 2010, 65% were on business, development officials or technical consultants, 20% were tourists, 360 people, and 11% were expatriates returning to visit family. In 2016, the number of visitors had increased to 2,000. The main island of Funafuti is the focus of travelers, since the only airport in Tuvalu is the Funafuti International Airport, and Funafuti is the only island that has hotel facilities. However, there are no tour guides, tour operators or organized activities, and no cruise ships visit. Ecotourism is a motivation of travelers to Tuvalu. The Funafuti Conservation Area consists of 12.74 square miles, 33.00 square kilometers, of ocean, reef, lagoon, channel and 6 uninhabited islets. The outer atolls can be visited on the 2 passenger cargo ships, Naviga 3 and Manifolao, which provide round-trip visits to the outer islands every 3 or 4 weeks. There is guest house accommodation on many of the outer islands. Telecommunications and Media. The Tuvalu Media Department of the Government of Tuvalu operates Radio Tuvalu, which broadcasts from Funafuti. In 2011, The Japanese government provided financial support to construct a new AM broadcast studio. The installation of upgraded transmission equipment allows Radio Tuvalu to be heard on all 9 islands of Tuvalu. The new AM radio transmitter on Funafuti replaced the FM radio service to the outer islands and freed up satellite bandwidth for mobile services. Fenyi, News from Tuvalu is a free digital publication of the Tuvalu Media Department that is emailed to subscribers and operates a Facebook page, which publishes news about government activities and news about Tuvalu and events. The Tuvalu Telecommunications Corporation, TTC, a state-owned enterprise, provides fixed-line telephone communications to subscribers on each island, mobile phone services on Funafuti, Vaitupu and Nuku'alofa, and is a distributor of the Fiji television service, Sky Pacific satellite television service. Communications in Tuvalu rely on satellite dishes for telephone and internet access. The available bandwidth is only 512 kilobits per second uplink, and 1.5 megabits per second downlink. Throughout Tuvalu are more than 900 subscribers who want to use the satellite service, with demand slowing down the speed of the system. Transport. There are limited transport services in Tuvalu. There are about 8 kilometers, 5 miles, of roads. The streets of Funafuti were paved in mid-2002, but other roads are unpaved. Tuvalu does not have any railroads. Funafuti is the only port, but there is a deep water berth in the lagoon at Nuku'vəluː. The merchant marine fleet consists of 2 passenger/cargo ships, Nivaga 3 and Manifolau. The Nivaga 3 and Manifolau provide round-trip visits to the outer islands every 3 or 4 weeks, and travel between Suva, Fiji and Funafuti 3 or 4 times a year. The Manifolau, a 50-meter vessel, was a gift from Japan to the people of Tuvalu. In 2015, the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, assisted the government of Tuvalu to acquire MV Talamoana, a 30-meter vessel that will be used to implement Tuvalu's National Adaptation Program of Action, NAPA, to transport government officials and project personnel to the outer islands. In 2015, the Nivaga 3 was donated by the government of Japan. It replaced the Nivaga 2, which had been in service in Tuvalu from 1989. The only airport in Tuvalu is Funafuti International Airport. It is a tarred strip. Fiji Airways, the owner of Fiji Airlines, trading as Fiji Link, operates services 3 times a week, Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday, between Suva, originating from Nadi, and Funafuti with ATR 72600, a 68-seat plane. Air Kiribati service provides 1 flight a week to Funafuti from Tarawa on a Wednesday. The service uses a Bombardier Dash 8-100 series aircraft, which has the capacity to take up to 35 passengers. Geography and environment. Geography. Tuvalu is a volcanic archipelago, and consists of 3 reef islands, Nanumonga, Ni'utau and Ni'ulakita, and 6 true atolls, Funafuti, Nanumea, Nui, Nuku'vəluː, Nuku'alofa and Vaitupu. Its small, scattered group of atolls have poor soil and a total land area of only about 26 square kilometers, 10 square miles, making it the 4th smallest country in the world. Over 4 decades, there had been a net increase in land area of the islets of 73.5 ha, 2.9%, although the changes are not uniform, with 74% increasing and 27% decreasing in size. The sea level at the Funafuti tide gauge has risen at 3.9 mm per year, which is approximately twice the global average. The rising sea levels are identified as creating an increased transfer of wave energy across reef surfaces, which shifts sand, resulting in accretion to island shorelines. The Tuvalu Prime Minister dismissed the scientists' findings. Funafuti is the largest atoll, and comprises numerous islands around a central lagoon that is approximately 25.1 kilometers, 15.6 miles, ns, by 18.4 kilometers, 11.4 miles, we, centered on 179 degrees and 7 minutes east and 8 degrees and 30 minutes south. On the atolls, an annular reef rim surrounds the lagoon with several natural reef channels. Surveys were carried out in May 2010 of the reef habitats of Nanumea, Nuku'alofa and Funafuti. A total of 317 fish species were recorded during this Tuvalu marine life study. The surveys identified 66 species that had not previously been recorded in Tuvalu, which brings the total number of identified species to 607. Tuvalu's exclusive economic zone, EEZ, covers an oceanic area of approximately 900,000 square kilometers. Tuvalu is a party to the Convention on Biological Diversity. The predominant vegetation type on the islands of Tuvalu is the cultivated coconut woodland, which covers 43% of the land. The native broadleaf forest is limited to 4.1% of the vegetation types. Climate. Tuvalu experiences two distinct seasons, a wet season from November to April and a dry season from May to October. Westerly gales and heavy rain are the predominant weather conditions from October to March, the period that is known as ʻtuːvəluː, with tropical temperatures moderated by easterly winds from April to November. Tuvalu experiences the effects of El Niño and La Niña, which is caused by changes in ocean temperatures in the equatorial and central Pacific. El Niño effects increase the chances of tropical storms and cyclones, while La Niña effects increase the chances of drought. Typically the islands of Tuvalu receive between 200 to 400 mm, 8 to 16 in, of rainfall per month. However, in 2011, a weak La Niña effect caused a drought by cooling the surface of the sea around Tuvalu. A state of emergency was declared on September 28, 2011, with rationing of fresh water on the islands of Funafuti and Nuku'alofa. Households on Funafuti and Nuku'alofa were restricted to 2 buckets of fresh water per day, 40 liters. The governments of Australia and New Zealand responded to the 2011 freshwater crisis by supplying temporary desalination plants, and assisted in the repair of the existing desalination unit that was donated by Japan in 2006. In response to the 2011 drought, Japan funded the purchase of a 100 cubic meters/d desalination plant and 2 portable 10 cubic meters/d plants as part of its Pacific Environment Community (PEC) program. 8 programs from the European Union and Australia also provided water tanks as part of a longer-term solution for the storage of available fresh water. The La Niña event that caused the drought ended in April to May 2012. The Central Pacific Ocean experiences changes from periods of La Niña to periods of El Niño. Environmental pressures. The eastern shoreline of Funafuti Lagoon on Fong-Afale was modified during World War II when the airfield, now Funafuti International Airport, was constructed. The coral base of the atoll was used as fill to create the runway. The resulting borrow pits impacted the freshwater aquifer. In the low-lying areas of Funafuti, the seawater can be seen bubbling up through the porous coral rock to form pools with each high tide. In 2014, the Tuvalu Borrow Pits Remediation (BPR) project was approved so that 10 borrow pits would be filled with sand from the lagoon, leaving Tafua Pond, which is a natural pond. The New Zealand government funded the BPR project. The project was carried out in 2015, with 365,000 square meters of sand being dredged from the lagoon to fill the holes and improve living conditions on the island. This project increased the usable land space on Fong-Afale by 8%. During World War II, several piers were also constructed on Fong-Afale and the Funafuti Lagoon. Beach areas were filled and deep water access channels were excavated. These alterations to the reef and shoreline resulted in changes to wave patterns, with less sand accumulating to form the beaches. Compared to former times, the shoreline is now exposed to wave action. Several attempts to stabilize the shoreline have not achieved the desired effect. The reefs at Funafuti have suffered damage, with 80% of the coral becoming bleached as a consequence of the increase in ocean temperatures and ocean acidification. The coral bleaching, which includes staghorn corals, is attributed to the increase in water temperature that happened during the El Niños that occurred between 1998 and 2001. A reef restoration project has investigated reef restoration techniques, and researchers from Japan have investigated rebuilding the coral reefs through the introduction of foraminifera. The project of the Japan International Cooperation Agency is designed to increase the resilience of the Tuvalu coast against sea level rise, through ecosystem rehabilitation and regeneration and through support for sand production. The rising population has resulted in an increased demand on fish stocks, which are under stress, although the creation of the Funafuti Conservation Area has provided a fishing exclusion area to help sustain the fish population across the Funafuti Lagoon. Population pressure on the resources of Funafuti, and inadequate sanitation systems, have resulted in pollution. The Waste Operations and Services Act of 2009 provides the legal framework for waste management and pollution control projects funded by the European Union directed at organic waste composting and eco-sanitation systems. The Environment Protection, Litter and Waste Control Regulation 2013 is intended to improve the management of the importation of non-biodegradable materials. Plastic waste is a problem in Tuvalu, for much imported food and other commodities are supplied in plastic containers or packaging. Water and sanitation. Rainwater harvesting is the principal source of fresh water in Tuvalu. Nuku-ve-loo, Vaitupu and Nanumea are the only islands with sustainable groundwater supplies. The effectiveness of rainwater harvesting is diminished because of poor maintenance of roofs, gutters and pipes. 8 programs of Australia and the European Union have been directed to improving the storage capacity on Funafuti and in the outer islands. Reverse osmosis, RO, desalination units supplement rainwater harvesting on Funafuti. The 65 cubic meters desalination plant operates at a real production level of around 40 cubic meters per day. RO water is only intended to be produced when storage falls below 30%. However, demand to replenish household storage supplies with tanker-delivered water means that the RO desalination units are continually operating. Water is delivered at a cost of $3.50 per cubic meter. Cost of production and delivery has been estimated at $6 per cubic meter, with the difference subsidized by the government. In July 2012, a United Nations Special Rapporteur called on the Tuvalu government to develop a national water strategy to improve access to safe drinking water and sanitation. In 2012, Tuvalu developed a national water resources policy under the Integrated Water Resource Management (IWRM) project and the Pacific Adaptation to Climate Change (PACC) project, which are sponsored by the Global Environment Fund/SOPAC. Government water planning has established a target of between 50 and 100 liters of water per person per day, accounting for drinking water, cleaning, community and cultural activities. Tuvalu is working with the South Pacific Applied Geoscience Commission, SOPAC, to implement composting toilets and to improve the treatment of sewage sludge from septic tanks on Fongafale, for septic tanks are leaking into the freshwater lens in the subsurface of the atoll as well as the ocean and lagoon. Composting toilets reduce water use by up to 30%. Cyclones and king tides. Cyclones. Because of the low elevation, the islands that make up this nation are vulnerable to the effects of tropical cyclones and by the threat of current and future sea level rise. A warning system, which uses the Iridium satellite network, was introduced in 2016 in order to allow outlying islands to be better prepared for natural disasters. The highest elevation is 4.6 meters, 15 feet, above sea level on Niulakita. Tuvalu thus has the second lowest maximum elevation of any country, after the Maldives. The highest elevations are typically in narrow storm dunes on the ocean side of the islands, which are prone to overtopping in tropical cyclones, as occurred with Cyclone Bibi, which was a very early season storm that passed through the Tuvaluan atolls in October 1972. Cyclone Bibi submerged Funafuti, eliminating 90% of structures on the island. Sources of drinking water were contaminated as a result of the system's storm surge and the flooding of the sources of fresh water. George Westbrook, a trader on Funafuti, recorded a cyclone that struck Funafuti on 23 December 24, 1883. A cyclone struck Nuku'alofa on 17 March 18, 1886. A cyclone caused severe damage to the islands in 1894. Tuvalu experienced an average of 3 cyclones per decade between the 1940s and 1970s, however, 8 occurred in the 1980s. The impact of individual cyclones is subject to variables including the force of the winds and also whether a cyclone coincides with high tides. Funafuti's ʻtuːvəluː islet was devastated by Cyclone Melly in 1979, with all its vegetation and most of its sand swept away during the cyclone. Along with the tropical depression that affected the islands a few days later, severe tropical cyclone Ofa had a major impact on Tuvalu, with most islands reporting damage to vegetation and crops. Cyclone Gavin was first identified during March 2, 1997, and was the first of 3 tropical cyclones to affect Tuvalu during the 1996-97 cyclone season, with cyclones Hina and Kelly following later in the season. In March 2015, the winds and storm surge created by Cyclone Pam resulted in waves of 3 meters, 9.8 feet, to 5 meters, 16 feet, breaking over the reef of the outer islands, causing damage to houses, crops and infrastructure. A state of emergency was declared. On Niue, the sources of fresh water were destroyed or contaminated. The flooding in Niue and Nuku-ve-loo caused many families to shelter in evacuation centers or with other families. Niue suffered the most damage of the 3 central islands, Niue, Nuku-ve-loo and Vaitupu, with both Niue and Nuku-ve-loo suffering the loss of 90% of the crops. Of the three northern islands, Nanumunga, Niutau and Nanumea, Nanumunga suffered the most damage, with from 60 to 100 houses flooded, with the waves also causing damage to the health facility. Vashafu'a Islet, part of the Funafuti Conservation Area, was severely damaged by Cyclone Pam. The coconut palms were washed away, leaving the islet as a sandbar. The Tuvalu government carried out assessments of the damage caused by Cyclone Pam to the islands and has provided medical aid, food as well as assistance for the cleaning up of storm debris. Government and non-government organizations provided assistance, technical, funding and material support to Tuvalu to assist with recovery, including WHO, UNICEF, UNDP, OCHA, World Bank, FAT, New Zealand Red Cross and IFRC, Fiji National University and governments of New Zealand, Netherlands, UAE, Taiwan and the United States. King tides. Tuvalu is also affected by peregrine spring tide events which raise the sea level higher than a normal high tide. The highest peak tide recorded by the Tuvalu Meteorological Service is 3.4 meters, 11 feet, on February 24, 2006 and again on February 19, 2015. As a result of the historical sea level rise, the king tide events lead to flooding of low-lying areas, which is compounded when sea levels are further raised by La Niña effects or local storms and waves. Impact of climate change. Challenges Tuvalu faces as a result of climate change. As low-lying islands lacking a surrounding shallow shelf, the communities of Tuvalu are especially susceptible to changes in sea level and undissipated storms. At its highest, Tuvalu is only 4.6 meters, 15 feet, above sea level. Tuvaluan leaders have been concerned about the effects of rising sea levels. It is estimated that a sea level rise of 20 to 40 centimeters, 8 to 16 inches, in the next 100 years could make Tuvalu uninhabitable. A recent study published in 2018 estimated the change in land area of Tuvalu's 9 atolls and 101 reef islands between 1971 and 2014. 75% of the islands had grown, with an overall increase in land area of more than 2%. Ellice Islands, the Prime Minister of Tuvalu, responded to the research by stating that Tuvalu is not expanding and has gained no additional habitable land. Ellice Islands has also said that evacuating the islands is the last resort. Whether there are measurable changes in the sea level relative to the islands of Tuvalu is a contentious issue. There were problems associated with the pre-1993 sea level records from Funafuti which resulted in improvements in the recording technology to provide more reliable data for analysis. The degree of uncertainty as to estimates of sea level change relative to the islands of Tuvalu was reflected in the conclusions made in 2002 from the available data. The uncertainty as to the accuracy of the data from this tide gauge resulted in a modern Aquatrack acoustic gauge being installed in 1993 by the Australian National Tidal Facility, NTF, as part of the USAID-sponsored South Pacific Sea Level and Climate Monitoring Project. The 2011 report of the Pacific Climate Change Science Program published by the Australian government concludes, the sea level rise near Tuvalu measured by satellite altimeters since 1993 is about 5 mm, 0.2 in, per year. Tuvalu has adopted a national plan of action as the observable transformations over the last 10 to 15 years show Tuvaluans that there have been changes to the sea levels. These include seawater bubbling up through the porous coral rock to form pools at high tide and the flooding of low-lying areas including the airport during spring tides and king tides. The atolls have shown resilience to gradual sea level rise, with atolls and reef islands being able to grow under current climate conditions by generating sufficient sand and coral debris that accumulates and gets dumped on the islands during cyclones. Gradual sea level rise also allows for coral polyp activity to increase the reefs. However, if the increase in sea level occurs at faster rate as compared to coral growth, or if polyp activity is damaged by ocean acidification, then the resilience of the atolls and reef islands is less certain. The 2011 report of Pacific Climate Change Science Program of Australia concludes, in relation to Tuvalu, that over the course of the 21st century, the South Pacific Applied Geoscience Commission, SOPAC, suggests that, while Tuvalu is vulnerable to climate change, environmental problems such as population growth and poor coastal management also affect sustainable development. SOPAC ranks the country as extremely vulnerable using the Environmental Vulnerability Index. While some commentators have called for the relocation of Tuvalu's population to Australia, New Zealand or Kia in Fiji, in 2006 Madia Tofa, Prime Minister from 2004 to 2006, said his government did not regard rising sea levels as such a threat that the entire population would need to be evacuated. In 2013, Prime Minister Ellice Islands said that relocating Tuvalu Islands to avoid the impact of sea level rise should never be an option because it is self-defeating in itself. For Tuvalu, I think we really need to mobilize public opinion in the Pacific as well as in the world to really talk to their lawmakers to please have some sort of moral obligation and things like that to do the right thing. 2015 United Nations Climate Change Conference, 21 Colombian pesos. Ellice Islands said at the 2015 United Nations Climate Change Conference, 21 Colombian pesos, that the goal for 21 Colombian pesos should be a global temperature goal of below 1.5 degrees Celsius relative to pre-industrial levels, which is the position of the Alliance of Small Island States. Islands said in his speech to the meeting of heads of state and government. His speech concluded with the plea. The countries participating in the Paris Agreement agreed to reduce their carbon output as soon as possible and to do their best to keep global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. Ellice Islands described the important outcomes of 21 Colombian pesos as including the standalone provision for assistance to small island states and some of the least developed countries for loss and damage resulting from climate change and the ambition of limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees by the end of the century. Filmography and bibliography. 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 Filmography and bibliography.